When we think about the great leaders in history, our minds usually jump to their big battles or their political reforms. But to really understand Umar ibn al-Khattab, you have to look deeper. His entire leadership, his whole way of thinking, wasn't just about ruling. It was about protecting one single core principle. Let's dive into what that was.
And here it is. This quote is basically the key to everything about him. It's not just a nice saying. It was the mission statement for his entire rule. For Umar, moving forward didn't mean inventing something new. It meant perfectly preserving what had been revealed. Sticking to the prophetic way, the Sunnah, was the ultimate guarantee against going wrong. So, to really get a handle on his decisions, and trust me, some of them can seem pretty radical to us today, we have to start where he started. And that was with the absolute #1 priority of protecting the Islamic creed from any kind of change or corruption. Right at the heart of that creed is this one concept, Tawheed, the absolute non-negotiable oneness of God. For Umar, this wasn't just some abstract theological idea. It was the bedrock of all reality. It was the foundation for law, for society, for every single action. Every decision he made was passed through a simple filter. Does this uphold Tawheed? And he saw his own power as a direct mandate from God, with a job description laid out right here in the Quran. He wasn't just a ruler, he was basically an executive hired to implement 4 key pillars: establish prayer, make sure the charity gets paid, promote what's good, and forbid what's evil. This was his divine mission statement for how to govern. To make this all really easy to follow, we can kind of frame his entire legal philosophy around a simple acronym, CORE. It stands for Creed Over All, Obedience to the Sunnah, Ritual Discipline, and the Eradication of Innovation. You're going to see this exact pattern play out in every major decision he made. Okay, let's look at our first case studies to see how this all worked in the real world. Because he didn't just talk about these principles, he was actively out there dismantling any pre-Islamic custom that could even possibly compromise them. So picture this. His governor in Egypt, Umar ibn al-As, comes across this deeply rooted pagan ritual. The local people believed that every year they had to sacrifice a young woman, a bride, to the Nile River, or else it wouldn't flow. And for a while, after the Muslims stopped the practice, the Nile actually did dry up. Omar's response here is just amazing. He doesn't just issue a decree or a new law. No, he sends a letter. But get this, it wasn't for the people or the governor. It was addressed to the Nile itself. The letter basically said, hey, if you flow because you want to, then we don't need you. But if you flow by the command of God, then flow. I mean, what a direct public lesson in Tawheed. So what happened? Well, according to the historical accounts, the result was incredible. After that letter was thrown into the river, the next morning, the Nile had risen 16 cubits. And that single powerful move is said to have ended that pagan custom for good, replacing a false belief with a crystal clear understanding of God's power. Okay, now we have to have a quick moment of academic honesty here. The source material for this explainer actually includes a footnote from the scholar Ali at Tantawi. And he points out that while this story is super famous and its message is powerful, its chain of narration, its isnad, is considered weak. So it's a story that's told more for the lesson it teaches than for its historical certainty. This focus on the why behind an action is a real signature of his leadership. We see another brilliant example of this during the pilgrimage. Umar goes up to the black stone and kisses it. But then he turns to everyone watching and says, look, I know you're just a stone. If I hadn't seen the prophet kiss you, I wouldn't be kissing you. It was literally a live demonstration for a community full of new converts. We do this as an act of obedience, not because we're worshiping the object itself. And that brings us to our next case study. See, Umar wasn't just reacting to problems that already existed. He was a master of preventative action. He was always looking ahead, trying to remove anything that could become a threat to the creed down the road. So, for example, there was the Tree of Ar-Ridwan. This was a really significant place in Islamic history where a famous pledge was made to the Prophet Muhammad. And because it was so important, people started going there specifically to pray. And right away, you can just imagine the alarm bells going off in Umar's head. He saw a dangerous path starting to form. A place that was meant to be respected for its history was slowly, maybe even unintentionally, turning into a place of worship. The focus was shifting from God to a thing. His response was decisive. He didn't just send out a memo or warn people about it. He ordered the tree to be cut down completely. He removed the source of a potential problem before it could ever grow into a real one.
And we see this exact same thinking when the grave of the prophet Daniel was discovered in a town called Tastar. Omar knew, he just knew that if people found out the exact spot, it would become a shrine. It would become a place of pilgrimage and a potential source of deviation from pure monotheism.
So what was his solution? It was both incredibly practical and pretty ingenious. He had his men dig 13 different graves during the day, right out in the open where everyone could see. Then, in the middle of the night, they buried the prophet Daniel in one of them and flattened all 13 graves, making sure no one would ever know the true location. So you might be wondering, how did this intense focus on the creed actually translate into running the state or military campaigns? The answer is, it was everything. For Omar, a leader's religious devotion was their most important qualification for the job.
In his letters to his governors, he made it totally clear. Prayer was their #1 KPI. He literally wrote to them, whoever protects it has protected his religious commitment. The logic was simple. If a leader was on point with their prayers, you could trust them with the state's affairs. If they were lazy with their prayers, they were going to be lazy with everything else. And this brings us to one of the most famous and, frankly, most controversial decisions of his entire rule. It involves the legendary general Khalid ibn al-Walid. I mean, this guy was a military genius, undefeated on the battlefield, the mastermind behind these incredible, stunning victories. Which brings up the big question that puzzled everyone back then and still puzzles people today. Why on earth would you fire your most successful general right in the middle of a winning streak? From a purely military point of view, it makes zero sense. But Omar's answer, which he sent in a letter to all his governors, tells you everything. His motive wasn't about strategy. It was about theology. He explained that he dismissed Khalid because he was afraid the people were getting too attached to him. They were starting to think victory came from Khalid's genius, not from God. He removed a brilliant general just to protect the core belief of his people. So, when you pull all of these different threads together, the story of the Nile, the black stone, the tree, the general, what you get is this remarkably consistent picture. Umar's whole life as a leader was just a masterclass in his own principle. Follow, don't innovate. And this brings us right back to that COR framework we talked about at the beginning. Every action was designed to protect the creed. His method was absolute obedience to the prophetic way. He enforced ritual discipline to keep worship pure. And he was absolutely relentless in the eradication of any innovation that could threaten the faith's foundation. And this leaves us with a final, really challenging question to think about. We've seen how Umar ibn al-Khattab governed. He put theological purity above military genius, above public opinion, and even above long-standing tradition. So it makes you ask, what does leadership actually look like when theology isn't just one part of the platform, but it is the absolute #1 priority?